Now that we have the two materials, we have to blend the two together. We'll do this with an AI layer shader. So hit the tab key, AI layer and layer shader. With this one, we can easily blend the two shaders together. So we have an extra shader group as well, which we will just delete. Then we will rename this one. Just click on the text on top of it and call it material blend underscore shader underscore SHA. So now we know which one this is. Then we need to plug this into the actual shader group. We set the out color and just plug this right under the material, the surface shader. Now nothing is going to happen because there's no shader attached to this. And now we can plug the bronze shader and the metal shader into the material blend, into the AI layer shader. You can see we have two slots. We have layer 1 and layer 2. We are going to enable layer 2, and then we're going to plug the two shaders into them. The easiest way is to have the material blend selected now, and then middle mouse button while hovering over the material gray, and drag this into the input. And now you can see what happens. You can see that this guy now has got the material of the material gray, which means this is now the base. Then we enable layer 2, do the same thing, middle mouse button, drag, and input, set it under the input. And now you can see this now becomes the layer 2. And this is based on the same way Photoshop works. It's based on layer 2 is on top of layer 1. I know this is a bit confusing because it's actually below, but the way the data works is it's actually on top. Just imagine this was flipped upside down, or layer 2 is higher up than layer 1. They should have made this a bit more visual, but this is just the way it works. So now we can blend between by going under layer 2 and setting the mix down. This is exactly the same as in Photoshop, just setting the layer on top to a lower opacity. And like in Photoshop, we can modulate this with a map. Instead of changing the material itself, we will just blend between these two. The way we'll do this is with an AI cell noise. So we'll just have this workspace up here. Type AI. I can't type AI cell. And there we go, AI cell noise. And this is where we can start to just input this directly. Now, this is not going to be the final thing we're using. We just have to actually see something. So now we will just middle mouse button drag this under the mix. And now we get up the connection editor. And now we'll set the out color and out R. This is exactly what we've done before when we just open it up. We set this to be mix 2. And then we can close. And now we should see that this starts to actually mix between the two. So now if we start to look at this, it's a pretty crappy noise right away because it has so many middle areas. It has so many areas which are gray and some which are black, or none which are black, and a lot of which are kind of just in the middle. So we have to change this quite a lot. First, we'll change the octaves to 5. This will get a lot more variation in it. That was 58, not 5. Just hit 5. And then we'll set this one, which I still can't pronounce, a little bit higher, just to get a bit more variation in it. And then we'll need to plug in a range as well. So again, annoyingly, we can't just plug it in between. We have to disconnect it and reconnect it again. So type AI range. And now we can connect this into the input. And we can take the out color under. Now you can see we have a mix slot. We can just plug this under the mix. The mix appears whenever we use the connection editor. And now we can see what's going on. And now we can just really start to crunch this up. So we set this to maybe around 0.5, and then we can set this to maybe like 0.6. The closer these numbers are, the harsher it's going to be. We want it to be really harsh. And you can see the minimum number should be lower than the high number. Because you see now this is 530, and if this is 580, if this goes below, then it inverts it. Which is totally fine. That's absolutely okay if you want that. Just be aware that is what it's doing. So if you want to invert the mask, you just go boop, and it's inverted. So I want this to be fairly close, but I don't want it to be so close that there are no gray values. And then we can see what this looks like. Now we can see that we have a result which looks like this. But in my case, I want this to be inverted. I want this to have the opposite ratio. So what I can do, I can of course switch the ratio here. Just switch this so the white becomes black and the black becomes white. Or you could just switch the inputs. So under your inputs, you can now set bronze to be under layer 1, and you can set this to be layer 2. And now you can see this is changing. If you want more variation, you're more than welcome to play with the scale. For instance, you can set this to 0.5. That was 0. You can actually get some cool results just by scaling it down like this as well. But let's just change this to 0.5. So now this lower the number is, the higher, the bigger the cloud flares, the cloud ones are going to be. So we can set this to 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. And now you can see they become massive. So if you want something like that, that's also cool. Set it to 2, 2, and 2. And you get these, they become really tiny. We're going to set this to something like 0.8. And like with everything we're talking about, this is not where we have one specific value in mind. This is really where we just go a bit back and forth and we just kind of experiment a little bit with it. It's important that you get an approach which works for everything and not just for this specific one. So now we blended these two together. You could, of course, do a lot more than this. You could break it up. This is purely using a noise, but you could use image maps and layer these on top of each other. You're more than welcome to go as crazy as you want to. One little warning, this is really tempting to do, but this will break everything, is if you were to use something like a curvature or an ambient occlusion with this might look a bit nicer because now you can really get the curvature in here and all that. But this will break in the next step, which is that we're going to be using this as displacement, which means that every single part which is being blended between, or the mask used to blend between, is going to actually push in and out. So if you were to now use a curvature, this will break the displacement. If you don't want displacement, totally fine. But the reason it breaks the displacement is that if you use a curvature, this is now going to give you a result based on the curvature of the model. But now if you use displacement, the curvature changes based on the displacement, which now changes the curvature, which changes the displacement. And now you have a cyclical logic error, which just goes crazy. So it's just going to crash or it's not going to do anything at all. So whatever you do, don't use AO and curvature. If you are, you're going to be using this with displacement. Now we will start with the displacement. We will hit the tab key, type displacement, and now we get the displacement shader. This gives us up a shader group and an actual displacement shader. Delete the shader group because we don't need that. And then under the displacement shader, we will plug this into displacement. So just take the output and just plug this under displacement shader. And then we will take the output R and just put this into the displacement amount. Very simple, very nice and easy. And now they're just plugged in together. Now under the displacement shader, we will set the amount to 0.1 or something really small, because now you can see this goes super crazy. So 0.1, now you can see we get a much nicer result this way. What we also want to do is we want to go under the AI range and just make sure that smooth step is enabled. And you can see this just gives us a much harder result like this. So now you can see that the iron goes out and the bronze goes in, which is actually the opposite of what we want. So what we want to do now is we want to use a reverse. If we hit the tab key and type reverse, now you can see we get a reverse node. What we'll do is, this will just inverse what we have. So black becomes white, white becomes black. Similar to hitting Control I in Photoshop. Just pause this. No reason to make this go now. Then under out color R, just plug this under the actual input. Just input X. And then we take the output X and just plug this into displacement. I know this is a bit confusing when it comes to X and Y and all that. You're like, why is there math in my shaders? But basically, one color goes into one input, the same output goes out. So X to X, Y to Y, etc. And now let's see what happens. Now you can see the opposite happens. Now you can see that we have this metal on the bottom, and we have this bronze amount going out, like so. And the reason this was so easy to set up is because we've already set up these models to actually work with displacement map before. If you remember one of the former chapters, if we went under the shape node and Arnold, you can now see that under subdivision, we've set this to Cat Clark and we set the iteration to 1. So what we can also do, we can set this to something like 2 or 3. That's going to give us much nicer the displacement as well. It's going to give us much more resolution. Make sure to do this for both of these pieces. Set the iteration to 2. This is just going to subdivide it twice as well. So now we have set up the main shaders for the helmet. You are of course more than welcome to tweak whatever you want with these shaders. This is not the gospel. This is just a pretty quick and pretty procedural way of doing shading like this without any UVs. In the next video, we will take a look at actually shading the hair.